Welcome to ZBook's Successful Authors Podcast. And with me today, I have Tom Grossman, the author of the new #1 best-selling book in Christian Bibles. It's called Reign of Fire, Jesus Warned About a False Messiah and a Global Trap 2,000 years ago. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Hey, how you doing, Eric?
Good. How are you?
Great to talk to you again after that little break.
Yeah, we've been doing some setup here. By the way, I like that lion in the back on your background there.
Yeah, that's one of the pictures of Jesus as the Lion of Judah. Yeah.
Oh, really? I was thinking that. I thought there was something behind that. Yeah.
So his first coming, he came as a lamb, and then his second coming, what we're talking about in the book, he comes as a lion.
Awesome.
And it's going to be a totally different, personality he shows forth. So
let's get to your book, but let's talk about you a little bit first. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, what would you like to know?
You're a pastor in North Texas.
Yes. Yes. I've been in the ministry about 20 years. About a year ago, I stepped down from a staff pastor position at about a 2,000 member church out here, and started a house church. And another buddy of mine named Norm Frederick, who just moved here from Germany about 3 years ago. He's from here, but he was living in, I don't know if you've ever heard of Herrnhut, Germany. Herrnhut. It's a little town, but it's a town where they had a 100-year prayer meeting going, led by the Moravians down in Herrnhut. Anyway, Norm was there serving as a missionary, and he just moved back. But so he's leading a couple meetings. I lead a couple meetings. We've got several people that are leading different meetings at homes. And of course, lately we've been doing everything on Zoom or FaceTime. So
cool.
This shutdown. So, but we're ready to get back.
Yeah, that's awesome. With technology nowadays, we can do that, huh?
Yeah.
So what got you into writing?
Well, actually 20 years ago, as a matter of fact, this is kind of my story. 20 years ago, I was just a regular guy going to church. My wife and I tried all the different meetings at the church. I mean, it was a great church here in Grand Prairie, Texas. This friend of mine, Norm Frederick, invited me to this conference at another church. It was about the House of Prayer. They were starting out what was called a House of Prayer. And it was really, they had some great speakers and worship. And I was in the back row, Eric. I'm not kidding you. Back then, I mean, this had about 450 senior pastors, worship leaders, just all these key people from the DFW area. I'm in the back row thinking I don't even belong here. And during the worship time, I'm looking up at the ceiling, just praising the Lord like we do. And all of a sudden, the ceiling disappeared in this building, and I'm looking up into the heavens. I mean, I'm like looking up in the sky, and I'm like, what is that? And I look around the room and nobody notices but me. And I'm seeing the Lord, Jesus Christ, coming back on his white horse like he promised with the host of heaven. And he's coming right down to Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I'm seeing a vision is what I was seeing.
Cool. And
he's coming, and all the people from the region were lined up on both. In this vision, we're lined up on both sides of Highway 30. And as the Lord was coming down, I looked at the people, and they were all weeping and wailing and like moaning. And I was like, what is this? And this idea that we're not ready for this just went into me. And it like awakened me. And the next thing you know, I mean, I'm talking like the next day, my wife and I we're in 5 2-hour prayer meetings a week. We're going to prayer meetings at 6 in the morning and 6 at night. And I mean, we're next to that, a few months later, we're in 10 meetings a week, and it just grew from there. And at one point we were doing 100 hours of live worship and prayer a week in this little building. And it was just a powerful time
Wow.
for
How
me.
much?
100 hours a week. We had
Wow.
like about 55, 60 meetings a week, or 200, over 200 meetings
Yeah.
a week with live worship teams and prayer leaders, and just a
Nice.
powerful time. So I've been in that type of ministry,
Mhm.
and that really we imported that from Kansas City. There's a ministry called the International House of Prayer, led by a guy named Mike Bickle, who's really the papa of all this. We're the same age, but I mean, this guy's a giant in prayer, a giant in the faith, really. You would probably have never heard of him, but in the Christian community, he's a very well-known guy worldwide.
That's
and
cool.
Anyway, that vision just kind of put me into this thing. And when 9/11 hit, about a year and 9 months later, I had become the leader of this ministry. First, I didn't even know what I was doing there. Then the next thing you know, I'm like leading it. So
step up to the plate, huh?
Yeah. So when 9/11 happened, I didn't even know. We didn't even have a TV. We were trying to stay out of media and all that, because we were so invested in prayer and the Word of God, and just so when 9/11 happened, it was like, what was that? I mean, in the spiritual realm, like what just happened? And I had been leading prayer meetings, so I'm like talking to God, and all these hours every week for the last year and 9 months, and I'm like, God, what is this? And our church had a big meeting at our house of prayer. There was about 200 people there. And one, leader after leader got up to try to say, well, it was the government's fault, and it was the Muslims, and it was, it was this, it was that, and all of them spoke. And at the end, I asked the senior pastor. I said, "Hey, can I say something?" Mm-hmm. And he said, "Yeah, go ahead." And I said, "Guys, I'm not sure, but what I believe happened is God just blew a trumpet to the church, telling the church to awake and return to Him, that it's time to really return to our first love." The thing you were saying, the one thing you were saying, do the one thing, that actually comes from Jesus. He's comparing two women, one who is sitting at His feet weeping, and the other one is working in the kitchen. And He's saying this one at His feet, Mary, chose the one thing. And the Lord was calling us back to our one thing. And that weekend at a conference, I actually met with Mike Bickle, and we just hit it off, and got to talk about the whole thing all weekend. And I realized that I didn't really know anything about end time prophecy. And so I began to read through the book of Revelation from cover to cover every day out loud in our house of prayer. I would do it on a microphone. I'd have instrumental music going when we'd usually have a team in there. And after a while, people just like, nobody would come in there, because you're reading about all this fire and all this blood and all these judgments and glory, and it's just smoke, and people just they knew what was going on in there, but they didn't really want anything to do with it. And I kind of like, just for about 40 days, maybe longer than that, but like just from cover to cover every day until the Lord released me from that. But I began to study the book of Revelation, and at first it was so confusing. I mean, it's all this symbolism and everything, and it took, years of real persistence of asking God, what does this mean? I'm reading it, but it's, seemed like all this confusion. And so after maybe 4 or 5 years, I started getting a handle on it, to where I felt like I could start teaching it a little bit. And then I've taught classes, and it's been something. Every time I teach, people will say, "What? You need to write a book. You need to write a book about it." And a couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and another speaker who's a well-known writer, his name's Samuel Whitfield. He writes on the the second coming as well. He said, man, you just, the message you gave was a great outline for the return of the Lord. He said, man, you need to get that in the book. So that's kind of where I really decided to press into it and get the work done.
Cool. Well, first of all, congratulations, #1 bestseller in Christian
Thank you.
Bibles. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
and but you said something interesting a minute ago, among other things. God blew a trumpet. Weren't there 7 trumpets?
Yes. Yeah. And
so which trumpet was it? #1?
Well, and here's the thing, people will say, use that expression.
Yeah.
It wasn't a biblical one of the 7. It wasn't one of the 7 trumpets, but that was good that you knew there's 7. But what trumpets were used for in Bible times, most people don't know this, but trumpets were used as the public address system. Cities, I mean, they didn't have electricity or way to amplifiers or anything, so they would blow trumpets to alert the city or an army, gather an army together, the enemy's coming. But it was a way to inform the city about emergencies, gathering together, moving out, moving in Moses' time, moving the camp,
Yeah.
So a trumpet blast is really like just a loud announcement. And it's interesting, our president is named Trump. And I like to call him, he's really is a trumpet, not
He'd be #7, huh? Trumpet #7.
Yeah, trumpet. There's a lot more to Trump than meets the eye, but he's exposing things. That we didn't really think about before, and things are being exposed in our country. All the conflict and division and all these things are being exposed.
Okay, so let's get into it. Why do you think, so it says, is the current global lockdown a sign of the last days? And so why do you think, what's your answer to that? What tell us more about your book and the reason you think so.
I mean, I'm making a point in the book that all the technology that we've developed, think about this, Eric. You're in your 40s, right? Late 40s?
Oh, thank you.
Mid 40s, right?
Yeah.
And I'm 64, but I've got children that are 41, 40, 30, and then 32 and 26, something like that. And so 2 of them weren't even born when the internet started. Think about, mankind has gone through all of mankind's history and all the development we've had, just in the last 140 years. We've had electricity, in homes with light bulbs. We've had, the telephone, we've had radios, we've had movies with talking pictures, we've had air conditioning. All these things are just recent things that we're totally, here in America, and probably in a big city like Germany, of course, you're totally used to this stuff. And we grew up with it, knowing what a telephone was. But I remember when the telephone was, the box was in the wall.
Yeah, me too.
The phone was made out of ceramic.
Yeah.
And we had a big family, and we only had one phone. One time my sister was talking on the phone, and I'm saying, get off the phone. She was my older sister. Get off the phone. I need to make a phone call. And finally, she grabbed me around the head and beat my head with that telephone about 15 times. I'm telling you what, I had lumps all over. That's what phones were like back then.
Yeah. And you could spy on people in the other room by picking up the phone.
Yeah, you had to be pretty stealthy, exactly. So, but we didn't even have answering machines or anything like that. I mean, that was when we got the answering machine, that was like, wow.
Yeah.
Beepers, so just in the last 30 years, the internet was invented. And think about how fast now we've come to almost every person, not every person, but even in nations like India, they have 90% of the citizens of India are in a database, a biometric database. I mean, that's unbelievable. In the United States, we'd be surprised. We would be surprised at how much they know about each individual in the country, But when we talk about this pandemic, what it's done is it's given the government more and more control over the citizens' lives, telling us, like they're telling people, hey, you got to shut down your restaurant now for the next 3 months. What?
Yeah, yeah.
It just took me $1 million to get to this point. I just shut it down now because people are getting sick. Yep, got to shut it down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's killing the economy. All this stuff is happening because people are afraid, in this spirit of fear going through the internet and we don't know, now they're doing testing, and you've probably read some of this, but in New York and in California, where 12 to 15 times as many people have had this virus and recovered from it, had the antibodies in them, totally recovered from it, and never knew they even had it.
Yeah. I'm convinced I had it too. In January this year, we all had a really bad cough, and we were already saying stuff like, "Man, that was a pretty hard cold or flu this year. Never had that one before." And that was this January. I had to take 10 days off of work, something like that. But I agree.
So now it's totally plunged the United States almost into a socialist country that everyone's been saying, these young people are rooting for, just give us all the money, now the government's doing it. Trump would have never agreed to this any other way, but they're printing so much money right now, just throwing baskets of money at everybody. And it's like, what it's going to do to the economy. So the whole thing, what I talked about is, I really believe it's another layer, another 2, 3, 4 layers of government surveillance, government control. One of the big tech guys, Mark Cuban, you probably know Mark.
Yeah.
With the Mavericks, he said what we should do is hire millions of people to be they are looking for people who have been contacted the virus. They've contracted the virus, and so now they have people that are checking everybody for the virus, and then they're putting them on, a database or whatever, and tracking them. Contact trackers, and it's like, what?
That Google already does that?
Yeah, I mean, so we're coming to a time where Big Brother is really, it's really here.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The part that most people don't realize, and this is the biblical part of it, is that for 1870 odd years, the nation of Israel did not exist. I mean, Israel was there from the time of Joshua, especially the time of King David. Israel was there for a couple thousand years, and then in 70 AD, this was about 35 years after Christ, the temple was destroyed, and the Jews were scattered all over the nations. That's how they wound up in Chicago and Poland and Germany and Europe, all over the nations, was because of this thing that happened in 70 AD. Well, they haven't been a nation for all those years. And then in 1948, because of things that happened during World War II, and then the United Nations granted them a charter to go back to Israel and to have Palestine, had cut out that piece of land that was theirs in the first place.
Yeah.
And so for all those years, Israel did not exist. Well, biblically, Jesus Christ cannot come back until there's a nation of Israel, but something else has to happen as well, and that's the Jerusalem temple has to be rebuilt. It's really clear from the teachings of Daniel, Jesus himself, this is in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's writing in Revelation, plus the Apostle Paul. So you got all the main writers of the New Testament, all are saying he's not coming back until there's a temple, because there will come a man that will make a peace treaty with Israel, a 7-year peace treaty. He'll have the temple rebuilt. And then in the middle of he's going to be like a big hero to Israel. He's going to be there. They're going to start to think he's the Messiah.
So do you think that's Trump?
Well, I wouldn't say it's Trump, except
he moved the embassy back.
Yeah, I know he's doing a lot of the Jews. They're even naming streets and towns after Trump.
Yeah.
I even have a coin it's like a temple, like a pre-temple coin with his picture on it with King Cyrus. They compare him to King Cyrus, who rebuilt the temple.
Wow.
In, what was it? It was about 515 or something after Israel had been captive to the Babylonians. But Trump is an interesting guy in that he really, really wants to make this peace treaty with Israel. And him and Netanyahu have already talked publicly about the rebuilding of a temple. This guy Trump he's a builder. He wants to build a wall, but he's built these fabulous hotels. He's built, resorts. He's built golf courses. I mean, the guy's a builder. He takes casinos. He likes to put his name on everything. And I've told my friends, I'm like, hey, I wouldn't rule it out if the temple is named Trump Temple. I'm just not kidding you.
So do you think go ahead.
Oh, but to say he would be the Antichrist, I don't really believe that, although he's got a couple things going for him, which I just mentioned, on top of the fact that Christians love him. I mean, the evangelicals and charismatics in the United States, they love him. I mean, I have friends that have gone so crazy over him, man. If you don't vote for Trump, I'm not kidding you. You're not going to be their friend anymore.
Would that make him the Antichrist?
Well, yes. Are people is he deceiving people? If he does that, would he be deceiving?
But if he rebuilds the temple,
yes. Well, rebuild the temple and make this 7-year peace treaty. He's got to do both. He's got to make this 7-year peace treaty. That's the key thing. The temple has to be rebuilt, which they could do tomorrow.
But you're not saying symbolically, actually rebuilding it.
Rebuilding it, because the Antichrist will stand in the temple. For 3.5 years, the temple will be built, and the Orthodox Jews, they've already got this all worked out. I mean, the Orthodox Jews will have animal sacrifices going day and night in the temple like they did in Jesus' time. That's what was going on when Jesus was. And so they haven't had that since 70 AD, okay? So the temple will be rebuilt. Those sacrifices will be going on, and then the Antichrist will step into the building and say, out of the way, I'm God. But some things will happen first, which I talk about in the book, is that it says 3 times in the book of Revelation in chapter 13 that he's called the beast in Revelation, that he will suffer a fatal wound and yet live. 3 times it says in the main chapter about the beast, the Antichrist, says 3 times in that chapter, he will suffer a fatal wound and yet live. Now, who's that sound like?
Yeah.
Who's that sound like before you go further?
A fatal wound and live.
He's risen from the dead. Who is that?
Sounds like Jesus.
Sounds like Jesus, and that's why he's called symbolically the Antichrist. He's against Christ, but he does so many deceiving things that look like what Jesus did. People are going to go, oh my goodness, he's even been raised from the dead. It's got to be the Messiah. It's got to be the real Christ. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I was a little confused because the person who rebuilds the temple doesn't have to be the Antichrist.
Right, doesn't have to be. Okay. The Antichrist, though, will be the guy that makes the 7-year treaty with Israel, and it says in Daniel, many others. And for years, people have thought that it would have to be between the Israelites and the Palestinians. And that's been the policy of the United States ever since Israel became a nation was to, to have them make peace there. And then the two-state solution came into effect. There's got to be two states. Well, Trump has said publicly, and the way Trump deals with people is, he's like, hey, if they don't want to make a deal, you can't make a deal with them. He's like, he took all the money away that we were giving the Palestinians because they were wasting it and burning our flag and saying they hate America. So he took all they were getting like $500 million a year from us. He took that away. Trump he's making deals with every other nation in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon. I mean, on and on and on. He's making every nation basically except Iran and Syria and Turkey, where Turkey's got other issues, but these nations need protection from Iran. That's what they're worried about. And so he's going to give them, the Antichrist will probably, and this is what Trump's plan is to give them protection, military protection from Iran, and yet give Israel protection from Iran and the Palestinians, and give them the chance for real, to be a regular member out there, which they haven't been. And so the rebuilding of the temple the peace treaty probably has nothing to do with the Palestinians. It's going to be with these other nations that will all come into agreement and say, yes, we're going to support Israel. And they're going to basically reject the Palestinians and Iran. That's that's the way I'm thinking on it. And that's what's happening right now. But whether that happens or not, who knows? But that's the way it looks to me. So
well, that's interesting. I'm going to have to read the book of Revelations again. Maybe your book too here.
No, you better read mine. You probably won't understand it. It's a hard book to understand until you get some grid work for it. But it's Revelations.
So that's an excellent point, because what's the difference between then and now? For example, like 20 years ago, because, man, when I used to live in California, exactly 20 years ago, I lived there until I was 27 years old. And me and my friends and my family were already saying, man, it's the end of times. It's the shit's going to hit the fan this year for sure. I had friends that they were burying their guns in the desert and building bunkers and stuff. And so without getting into Keynesian economics, if you can call it that, we've been saying this for 20 years and nothing happens. It's not, maybe it fizzles a bit, but nothing happens. So what's the difference between then and now? Or can you put a timeline on it?
Well, I think what you've got Israel as a nation. When Israel became a nation, there was a lot of people who thought, it's going to happen within one generation from then, because Jesus made a comment about, when you see these things, this generation won't pass away. But what he was referring to was the building of the temple and the abomination. When you see those things happen. So the timeline I'm looking at is, I'm looking at a president that could make this peace treaty happen, that really wants to make it. And I think Trump, the one thing he has is this huge, and I love our president. I love your flag up there. I love our president. I voted for him. I'm going to vote for him again. But he has this huge insecurity in him where he really wants to be loved by everybody. He stirs up all these fights all day long, but really deep inside, he wants to be the guy everybody fawns over. And if he makes this deal, which he's calling the deal of the century, if he makes this deal, then he'll go down in history as the greatest, as the greatest deal maker, the greatest president ever, the deal that nobody could make. And so I think that pressure on him to do it, and all the situations around Israel that are really brewing like this, the fact that Iran's probably going to have atomic weapons anytime, within the next, who knows when, we don't even hear those reports anymore. There's so much other junk going on. but just everything's cooking toward that time. Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, him rejecting the Palestinians and saying, I don't care about them. They don't matter in this deal. And they rejected his peace offer. I mean, he offered them a deal worth $50 billion just to start. And they just said no to it without even looking at it.
Yep.
So I think Trump, if he gets elected, he will have the political clout and the clout in the world. In other words, the guys that were been trying to get rid of him, it's just really not going to work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be in for another 4 years. And I think that clout that he carries, he can put all that to use in making this peace treaty and letting them build this temple. And I think that's something that really burns in his heart. I mean, his son-in-law Jared is a Jewish guy. I mean, he's Jewish. His daughter is converted to Judaism. He's got this huge group of Christian leaders around him who are all pushing him to build this temple. They're from another thought, another line of thought than I am on the end times. They believe this temple will be built. It'll be a great thing, and they'll be raptured before the Antichrist comes. That's their thinking on it. That's like the Jerry Jenkins books, Left Behind. Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins sold like 50 million books. Left Behind. That's all based on this one isolated scripture. And it was built on a theology that's about 300 years old of a woman who had a vision. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit trail right now, but it's these guys that are around President Trump all have this. It's called the pre-tribulation rapture. They believe before the tribulation, before the time of the Antichrist, the church will be raptured. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, yes. Okay. But you can explain it if you want, because I'm not an expert.
Yeah. So what they're saying is they believe that the church will never face trouble, never face persecution, never face martyrdom. I mean, that's their belief. It's kind of like a pipe dream or looking at the world through rosy glasses, because the church has suffered persecution, martyrdom. I mean, John the Baptist was martyred. Jesus was martyred. James was martyred. All the early apostles were martyred except for John. He was the only one that wasn't martyred. Thousands and thousands of Christians were martyred in the first century alone. And I don't know, hundreds of thousands have been martyred over the years. In China right now, they're being churches are being bulldozed. I mean, Christians are being hauled off to jail. The same in Iran. I mean, the persecution of Christians is heavy, but we think this pre-tribulation rapture is really kind of like a English American kind of theology. It's kind of like a prosperity theology. Like God would never allow that to happen to us Americans, or us, rich Europeans. But hey, you guys in China and Africa and all that, you can go through all that, but not us, because we're special. That's God doesn't show favorites like that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So that's the leaders that Trump has around him, these Christian leaders you hear about. That's the camp they're all from. And so the camp I'm from is the biblical camp, the camp that says what Jesus said, that says you will see these days. I will not come back until you see these things take place. And until you see this 7-year treaty, until you see the abomination of desolations, it's called, and after the time of the great tribulation, that's when he's coming, he says. So, and that's when the rapture takes place. So that's the camp I'm from. That's what my book talks about.
Okay, so
real clear.
I can't resist, though. Who do you think he's alive? Who is the Antichrist? Or is it a spoiler? You can't talk about it.
Well, I mean, no, of course I wouldn't know. And I kind of feeling like it'll be somebody in the power structure that works on this peace treaty with President Trump
Hmm.
or whoever makes this peace treaty. If it was Trump, I just think he is hated so much by so many people, and it's so deep in them.
Mhm.
I can't see this,
Hmm.
even if he rose from the dead. I mean, even if President Trump was assassinated and rose from the dead, I think people would say, kill him again. That's how much hatred there is here in the United States for him, if you watch our media.
Yeah. Well, Jesus didn't have everybody on his side either.
No, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Jesus just had a rare group, and it's really the Christians he deceives. He's out to deceive the ones who don't believe in Christ. The Antichrist isn't worried about because they're already going to follow him anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really out to deceive Christians. So that pushes it back over to somebody like Trump, who's loved by, and notice I say someone like him, who's loved by the church, loved by Christians, who does everything everything Trump does. We go, yeah. Now, a couple of things on the economy, people are starting to get angry with him about, with this virus and everything.
Yeah.
But up till then, everything he's done has been, wow, yeah, he's great. He prays, he goes to church. He has Christians come and pray in the White House. I mean, he does all these great things for Christians. And his insecurity, I think, is the thing the enemy could really prey on. But to me, he seems too old, and So,
what are some of the other signs then? What are the things that have to happen?
Well, when his disciples in Matthew 24 and in Mark 13 they ask him about the signs of his return. The very first thing Jesus says is, watch out, no one deceives you. That's the first thing he says. Watch out, no one deceives you. And then he says, many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ. They'll say, I am the Christ, and they will deceive many. Now, usually that's interpreted to mean like false messiahs, but you read that in plain English, he says, many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and they will deceive many. And I believe what that means is Jesus is saying there's going to be a widespread deception throughout the church where the leaders are actually deceived about his return. And we're living in that time where most of the pastors, and the reason I bring up the United States so much is because we're the last nation. I'm not saying we're the nation with the most Christians, but we're the last nation that puts on the, hey, we're a Christian nation thing. We still, in God we trust, on our money. And we're the last nation with freedom of religion, really, that on the power that exists. So when nations look at America, that's kind of, in Christianity, they see us as really the leaders. But in the church, not 100%, but I would say, and I've been in the church for 35 years, and I love the leaders in the church, but almost throughout the church, there's very little prayer among the leaders. Now this pandemic is getting people to pray, believe me, because they don't know what else to do, so they're turning to God to pray, which is a good thing. But almost whole swaths of them have bought this idea with the pre-tribulation rapture, and when they look at really the end times, all this confusion that's been sown in theologically about the end times when Israel did not exist had to be symbolic. It was like, well, Israel doesn't exist, so it's got to be symbolic. And so most of them are totally confused. And when you're confused, you can't really, if we're going to take a trip from Berlin to London or whatever, well, I'm just making this up. I don't know where you can go in a car from Berlin nearby, but Poland, Warsaw, let's say, that's a little bit of a trip. But if we're all confused about where we are now and where Warsaw is, how are we ever going to get there? You know what I mean? How are we going to make the trip?
Yeah.
And so that's where most of the church leaders are. They're afraid to talk about the end times anymore. You know, there's been so many false prophecies about it. Like you were saying 20 years ago, you know, it was really a hot topic. Now it's almost, the church is almost shut down on it completely because they're afraid to address it because of all the confusion that's been sown into their thinking over the years because of all the false teaching. So that's what I'm saying. They're deceiving people, not on purpose, but just out of a confused state of mind, you know, that they're unsure of themselves. You know,
That's the first one?
Huh?
That's the first sign. And
Is
then
deception, yeah.
and
the
then what?
leaders being deceived, yes.
Yeah. And then
So
what has to happen next?
Well, it talks about wars, rumors of wars, but those are called general signs. The general signs are the wars, rumors of wars, plagues, earthquakes, you know, famines. Those things have been happening for years, but there's a scripture also which talks about brother turning against brother. And there's an interesting thing in the last century. When you look at a genocide, you know, the look at genocide in the last century, there has been more genocide. I mean, brothers in one country turning against, you know, living in Germany, you know, Hitler was a forerunner of the Antichrist. I mean, he was a guy who came out and he had all this charismatic and people loved him, but he turned the Germans' hearts against the Jews, and I mean, got them to hate them enough to kill them, thinking they were doing a good thing. And this genocide's been happening in the Soviet Union, Germany, Croatia. I mean, you know, Sudan, you name it. I mean, all over the world it's been going on. Vietnam, Cambodia, where brothers are turning against brothers, maybe because they're a different color, a different race, a different religion, and they're turning against them and just killing them all, thinking it's a good thing. So I think that's a sign we don't look at that much, but that in the last, I can't think of whenever it's happened that much. We don't know too much history before 1900 on things like this, where it's been as widespread. Do you know what I'm saying? But
yeah.
everywhere communists has taken root in a strong way, there's been a lot of persecution, a lot of, you know, the press is kind of shut off and these leaders do what they want, right? To the people who are against them. So that's a big sign. And then it comes down to persecution. There will be widespread persecution against the church, which we're seeing all over the world. And now it's really heated up in America, where churches are shut down. Now they're being fined. I don't know if you've seen this, but churches are in some of the bigger cities are being fined like $5,000 because they held a meeting. The churches are already hurting for money, and now they're being fined $5,000, $10,000 by the government for holding a meeting. So now they have to get permission. You know, something that was our right to worship freely is now something we have to ask the government for permission to do, right? Even in America, that's happening. So
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so those are all things that lead up to the culture of the Antichrist. But the internet is one of the biggest things, and the widespread communication, the ability, the banking system, all being connected to the internet. Think about it. Everyone's got the little cards now. You know, who hardly writes checks anymore for anything? You buy stuff on Amazon, and you know, you do all this internet business with your card. You don't even need your card. It's got your card already. You just hit the number and bam, it just goes. And the fact that all of us are connected to this really, it's like we built a tower to heaven like they did in the days of Balaam, or not Balaam, Babel. in the days of Babel in Genesis chapter 10 and 11. They built a tower to heaven. It says God said he said, man, they're all speaking the same language. That's what we're doing on the internet now. We can order stuff from China. Well, we could order stuff from China before, but we're speaking to all these countries freely on the internet, changing information, and it's just like become a one world economy, one world ecosystem. And that's definitely a sign, because it says no, unless you take the mark of the beast, no one will be able to buy or sell. So that could never be done before in the world, where every person could be shut out of the internet unless they take the mark of the beast.
That's an interesting one, because it's very timely, because Facebook wants to enter the e-commerce market. So like Alibaba is that big one in China. eBay is the big one in the West. And now it's all tied into the money, the cryptocurrency they want to make, called Libra. And so if Facebook shares have gone up a lot yesterday, because they are entering, it's called Facebook Shop or Facebook Marketplace. I'm not sure. So knowing this, and knowing that they already have your profile, and looking back at Cambridge Analytica, how well they were able to know everything about you just from the metadata. And then if let's just say Facebook, if Facebook is successful in the e-commerce space, then they will be the biggest store in the world, even bigger than Amazon, just by the sheer number of users and the size of their platform. And so this is maybe congruent to what you were saying, but actually you're the expert. So
well, I'm certainly not an expert on technology. Although I've read a lot about, I try to keep up with biometrics and to really see how far that's advancing. And I used to look at it every day, kind of like, what are the new, and I mean, for a while, every day something was happening in the arena of biometrics that was just like never happened before. I mean, this is never, I mean, we're going through a season there where things have never happened before now become commonplace in just a matter of days. And just the way they want to, use facial IDs at airports all over the world. That's becoming an internet. It's not fully implemented, but it's going to be fully implemented.
It is in China.
Yeah, you can't get on an airplane without your facial, recognition approving you. And when it talks about the mark of the beast, it says it's the number of a man. It says the number of the beast is the number of a man. It says his number 666, and people will go, 666, what does that mean? It's really about the number of a man, and biometrics is really the measure of who you are as an individual. In other words, what's your iris like? That's unique to you. What's your smile like? That's unique totally to you. What's the way you walk, your gait, your handwriting, your fingerprints, all that stuff that's unique only to you. And the whole idea of biometrics is to be a gatekeeper, to allow you to cross the border or not cross the border, to allow you on the airplane or to stop you from being on the airplane, to allow you into a web computer system or to keep you out of it. The whole idea of biometrics is an idea of using that personal information that makes you totally unique and could shut you out or let you into something. That's the whole idea is based on. And so when you get, the very first chapter in the book, I just start out with this in the first couple of pages, just saying, okay, the beast is, we don't call him the beast, the Messiah is basically threw a big party in Jerusalem and everybody's watching it. You wake up the next morning and you can't get on the internet. Like, what's going on? Your car won't start because you got the chip. Your phone doesn't work. You can't get in the bank. Nothing will happen. All your neighbors are out there talking, going, what's going on? You say, well, I'm going to go up to 7-Eleven. They say, hey, you need to bring some cash. And you get there, all these people are in line because they got their cards and they won't work. And the guy say, you got to use cash now until you get approved back into the system. And the whole system has shut you out.
Yeah.
Now to get back on, see, you're shut out from your bank, your all your stuff you do on the computer, you're shut out from everything. The bank won't even, you walk in the door and they go, what's your number? Well, I'm pulling it up, but there's a blocker here, right? So the idea, my thinking of the mark of the beast is people saying, I'll do anything to get back on the internet. I'll do anything to get back into my 401k, my savings account, the equity in my house, my kids' education, my career, everything I've worked my whole life for is basically locked up in there, right? And the whole idea, I believe the mark of the beast is going to stop people for 1 second and block them out until they basically bow down and basically give the beast whether it's their right hand or their eye scan and say, yes, I will submit to your rules. I'll follow you. I'll obey your commandments. I'll be one with you. You know what I mean? On this whole global world of government and religion you're putting together. And I believe that's what it'll do. And people who love their stuff more than they love Jesus are going to just take this, or don't know Jesus, are going to just, of course, they're going to want to be back into their stuff. It's going to take some pretty determined people to say no at that point and say, I'll walk away from my house. I'll leave my car. I'll leave everything I have except I'll take a bag of groceries out of the fridge and, because they're going to come from my house next, right?
This is the point where I always say we got to get Amish,
I think, I have a couple children, grown children that are moving out. My son's moved out to Arkansas to a little farm, and they're, they got their chickens,
so
goats for milk, and, their pigs and the whole thing. And my daughter's buying a little place in Oklahoma to live out in the country and get kind of not totally off the grid, but be kind of on the border so you could get off if you need to. And I think it's really about, Eric, it's about the Father of, God the Father wanting a bride. It's called a bride in the Bible. That's, even though we're men, we're called those who believe and follow his son, Jesus, are called the bride of Christ. And the Father wants a bride for his son. Jesus laid down his life, not just so people could be forgiven, but so that they could come into a family, that they could be part of this bride of Christ. They could be part of his eternal family. And what we've become, because we're so tech savvy, I mean, we don't smell the flowers. We don't stop and look at the sunset. We don't look at the waves. You know what I mean? We're not smelling the air or looking at my daughter said, gee, Dad, we were out at our cabin in Oklahoma looking out the window at all the stars.
Yeah.
You can see about 10 stars out here in Dallas, and you don't know if they're stars or satellites up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like we're so far, removed in our everyday lives from the things God created. And he's like, I'm going to bring you back to a simpler lifestyle, and the one thing you really need is to know my son Jesus. That's really what I don't preach that. I'm not like preaching that real hard, but the book is pointing to, hey, it's going to come down to a decision. That everyone who's ever lived on the planet, everyone throughout history who's ever lived, we could debate how long history's gone and all that, but every person who's ever lived up till the people living right now has died. It happens to everybody. They all die. They get old and die, or they die from a sickness, or they die from an accident, but everybody dies. And we spend so little time thinking and preparing for the life after. You know what I mean? Like, what happens after that, Eric? I mean, you know, when I die, what happens to my life after that? I mean, we have this sense that there's more. We have this sense there's a God. We have this in our heart. There's something, you know, missing in there, but we, you know, get distracted by this and fascinated by that. We run over here and we miss it. We miss what life's really about. What God created us for was to know him and be part of his family, to be part of Christ's bride. And the bride, like women are called sons of God in the Bible. Well, it means sons and daughters, but just to make it simple, you know, we're all sons of God. But my wife's not a man, she's a daughter of God, right? She knows that. We're all called the bride of Christ. That doesn't mean that we're going to turn into women, but what it means is we're part of his desire. The reason he created the planets, the reason he created the universe, was to have a people at the end of the age that said, I'll give up everything to know you. I'll leave everything behind so that I can know you forever, if it costs me my life. You know, that's really what we're heading to. And so that's, you know, that's kind of a decision you're supposed to make right when you give your life to the Lord. I don't know what your background is, and I'm not going to try to evangelize you on your show, but
okay,
it's like, why do I exist? You know, if we look at all of history, no one born before 1900 is alive now. We know that pretty much for sure. You know, and every year that passes, another, I don't know how many million die a year, but in a certain amount of years, everyone alive now, unless he comes back, will die as well. So it's like, why do we even exist? I mean, do we just exist so we can talk to each other on Zoom? And, you know, I mean, there's more to it. And God, the one who made the stars in the universe, says that he chose for himself people before the beginning of the world. He chose you. He was looking for you. Can you imagine Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, what we call the Trinity, thinking up this whole thing and going, man, there's going to be these two guys on the internet talking to each other from two different sides of the earth.
Yeah.
You know, like, who would have thought of this like 40 years ago? Impossible, right?
Pretty cool.
Here we are talking to each other right now. And then it's like I'm creating this whole thing for these guys just to know me because I like that guy so much. I see something in him. I see something in Tom, but I see something in Eric that my heart's burning for. I want to share this. I want to share everything I have, you know, the Father, all of who he is with a few people. You know, it's going to be more than a few, but it's, you know, with handfuls of people who say, hey, Lord, all this stuff, yeah, it's great. You know, all these big companies, all this success, all that, it's great, but man, you're so much better. You know, you're where my joy comes from. You're where my peace and my worth comes from. So that's kind of where the book is kind of, you know, what I'm trying to shine people toward in my you know, second grade my second grade level of communication. The Lord is looking for people that he can draw. He's drawing them in like a fisherman, drawing them in, you know, to himself. So yeah,
well, that's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know what to say after that, you know.
yeah. So well, we could talk about Paul, you know. Paul.
Okay, tell me about Paul.
Paul Brody.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were talking about the disciple. Oh, I had one more for you. Wait a minute. I have several questions. I have several
Yeah, yeah.
questions.
Let's get to more questions. Okay,
You got time?
sure.
Okay, maybe.
Are you? I still have gas in my computer, so we're
Okay.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, well, talking about technology, we had a reality check here a while ago. The telephone system was down.
Ah,
So it happened while I was at the store. And guess
okay.
what? Nobody could use their credit cards anymore to pay or anything.
Right,
And
right.
what do you think was, I mean, that was pure chaos on earth
Yes,
right there. And just because we lost the telephone lines, and everything was acting like it was the second coming right then and there in the store,
right,
I can't pay with my credit card. We are so dependent on these damn telephone lines. It's internet.
right.
It's scary. It's really
Yes.
scary. And
How long were the lines
China
down?
is already doing the biometric thing with WeChat, or I don't know what it's called, but they already have social points, which are deduced from the algorithm from your social profile. And I don't know what it's called, WeChat. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And
And we, the guy who runs the government, has his own app. Did you know
no,
that?
no, I didn't. Yeah,
He has his
perfect.
own app where if you want to be a good citizen, you get like a little thing, a little
Yeah.
devotional every day, let's call it, where you read the story he has. It's about communism, and then you answer the questions. And when you do that, then you upload it. You load it back in. Your citizenship score stays high. So a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But
So a
what
lot.
bothers me the most about all that stuff is, like I said, me and my friends and family were talking about this 20 years ago. And he said 1984 is now, man. And that was 20 years ago when I still lived in the United States. And, oh, you're crazy, you're paranoid. Oh,
Yeah.
just look up Cambridge Analytica. I don't know if people
Yeah.
remember that, but just look it up. Cambridge Analytica was a big scandal because Facebook, Google, in the West, they're already doing like China. It's just not over the table.
Right. It's
That's
all
why we
being.
have Edward Snowden now, because he showed everybody that they've been doing it for years, or we have been doing it for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm a big Edward Snowden fan. I don't know. Anyways, I'm off on a tangent as usual.
No, no, that's fine.
Okay.
I saw the movie with him in it, or about him, and boy, that was fascinating. Just
I haven't seen it. I got his book. I have to watch the movie. Which
yeah,
one? I think there are
uh,
two.
my wife and I saw it. I think we saw it at the show.
Okay,
I
the
mean,
new one, the big one. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, to see these underground facilities that the government has, with
Yeah.
all this stuff going on underground, it's like
Yeah.
these vast complexes and everything of computers and all these brilliant people working on all this stuff all day long developing. I mean, it's like, oh my, where else? The natural end of this is exactly where it's going. It's going to be complete surveillance, complete control, and it'll all be, Eric, for our safety, to
Oh yeah,
protect,
yeah, yeah. Of course.
because they're looking out for our best, right?
That's why I'm such a big fan of Edward Snowden.
Yeah,
Uh, he voted for Obama, and
yeah,
then he saw Obama doing everything that Bush did, and were doubling down on the biometric stuff. So that's why
yeah.
Edward Snowden became the leaker, or
Right, right.
whatever. And okay, but so now I'm kind of going in circles now. Like I said,
But
we've
that's
been
okay.
talking like this for 20 years.
Yeah,
When is the end game?
yeah. Well, I think the thing I'm looking for, because yeah, I've see. I don't know if you ever heard of Charisma magazine.
Maybe.
It's a big charismatic. They've been around for 30, 40 years, but they have a website. You can go to charismanews.com, and they
Mm-hmm.
have every once in a while they'll ask, what is God saying? What are the signs? And they ask like 30 prophets, like, what do you see and what's God saying about his return right now? And they had, one guy's talking about the red moons, another guy's talking about the earthquakes, another guy's talking about Trump, another that. And really the sign that Christ gave us, the sure sign in the Word of God, is this 7-year peace treaty. I mean, it is the most publicized event, prior to the return of Christ. Think about the return of Christ as the most advanced prophecy ever. It's the most
Mm-hmm.
millions and millions of Bibles. It's the bestseller every year, right? I mean, the Bible is the #1 seller worldwide, has been for, I don't know, 150, whatever the printing press started probably, but
Mm-hmm.
it's been promoting this idea of the second return of Christ forever to anyone who cares about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on this idea of this 7-year peace treaty
Mm-hmm.
with Israel, and it's some kind of security thing to make a peace pact with Israel and these other nations. That tied in with the rebuilding of the temple, I think are
Mm-hmm.
until those two things happen, I think we should keep our cool. You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
shouldn't put all our chips in one jar. I don't think you should invest everything in gold right now and, bury it in your backyard quite yet.
Yeah.
But I think, and whether it'll do you any good at that time, I don't even know. But
Yeah.
I know from scripture, those are the only things that have not been fulfilled that have to be fulfilled. And everything else is like kind of a smoke screen. Everything else. There's going to be bigger earthquakes. I mean, there's more earthquakes now around the world. There's more disasters. I mean, there's more stuff happening in it. I mean, in the United States, stuff we never heard about before, like these California fires. And then I don't know if you heard about the dams in Michigan today that broke. Two big dams, a 500-year flood, they said,
Wow.
had over the last few days crashed these two big dams, and the rivers overflowed into towns and evacuated thousands and thousands of people. A huge emergency. Things are happening like all the time with that.
Mm-hmm.
And all these are just like confirmations that what he said is true. But until we see this 7-year treaty, this temple be rebuilt, we can, I mean, those are the two things I look for that keep me basically walking on a straight line. Otherwise, you could be chasing biometrics, you could be tracing false prophets, all these things. But it's that I'm kind of zoomed in on. And, I believe it's going to happen in the next, I mean, how much further can we go with technology? Are we going to wait till robots are, you ever see that movie Wall-E? It was like kind of
a long time ago though.
Where all those people were laying there on the cruise ship. All these overweight people are in their trunks, they're in recliners on the sun deck of this big cruise ship, and they're slurping on big shakes and watching their TV, their video screens, and they're just totally asleep. And the robots are going around pouring them more milkshakes and stuff. It's just like hundreds of them, just all totally hypnotized by their screens. So
I'm going to watch that movie again too.
How much further can we go as a global civilization?
Well, the scary part is that everybody accepts it, mostly. So we already all have biometric passports.
Right.
The NSA and the government has already done it with or without our consent.
Right.
And so that's the scary part. But let me get one more question about the book, and then we'll get into our other questions. This one thing was standing out at me for a while here. The mission of my book is to help people see that, the concept of the end of the world is hardwired into the human DNA and is a gift from God. What's it about? So could you tell us about that for a second?
Yeah, there have been more movies. The movie industry isn't that old. But if you looked at the 50s, 60s, 70s, every decade, there's like the end of the world movies now they're making more videos and movies than ever before. But there are literally hundreds of movies about the end of the world. How the apocalypse, how the world ends, the great earthquake, the great tsunami, all these things. And all the fear about climate change, climate change. Oh man, people are going crazy, ready to throw their soul away over this idea of climate change. The pandemics, people are like, just, they're so afraid. But I think this is wired into us from God, because he wants us to look for a savior that will save us from this. The true savior there's a savior coming. There's help is on the way. There's a deliverer coming to rescue us out of this. But we've got to see that. And I think it's in the human DNA to know, we know things are going to end badly, poorly for the world. I mean, all these zombie movies where people, I've never watched a zombie movie, but I've seen enough commercials and stuff to know there's literally, I've seen more stuff on this, UFO stuff, aliens coming, taking over, the end of the world, all this stuff. And it's like, I think it's just pointing us to the fact that, hey, this world that we're trusting in, this world that we base our futures on, we're keeping our clocks on, our calendars, your schedule on, all this is only by permission, as long as God allows us to have the time, and he's predicted a day. He's, he knows there's a day coming when these things will end. So what will it really be like? And I'll tell you what, Eric, as I was part of this big church, which I loved. It was a great church out in Arlington, Texas. A great pastor out there, Gary Hutchinson. I'll give him some, we're on the internet, I'll throw some kudos at him. But it was when Trump was first elected, when the election was going on, and then all the warfare after he got elected. I'm telling you, Eric, after 3 days of the news media beating on you like that, the way they were coming against Trump, anybody would have been calling their doctor saying, give me something, put me out of this, man. I thought he was going to resign in the first month or two. I thought, how could any human being stand in this? But as all this was going on, the news, the fake news, the no news, just all this stuff going on in politics, the media, I started thinking, the Antichrist, this would be the perfect environment for him to be raised up in, with all this deception that is now being uncovered, and we're seeing it for the first time. And the Antichrist would fit into this. He could be a senator right now. He could be a congressman. He could be a governor. He could be a news host.
Well, I know who she is. I'm not going to. Sorry.
Yeah, he could fit in anywhere in America, in the media, in politics, and he would look like an angel next to a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
He would be the guy, the good guy, the guy we're going, man, but John Jones over there, man, he's a righteous guy. We'd all be looking at him like he's the one guy that, we can all count on. But all these, think about how wicked. It's like snakes everywhere, just biting and attacking each other. The environment is perfect. The environment has never been better like this, where somebody can just grab hold of all this, the media, the internet, take hold of it, make this peace treaty, get it's only a building. The temple is only a building. The dimensions of the temple are only supposed, the religious part of it is only supposed to be 30 feet wide by 90 feet long.
That's not big at all.
2,700 square feet. A lot of us have homes bigger than that.
Yeah.
That's the size of the required size of it. All the other stuff that was built onto it was all extra stuff that God never required. When Solomon was building the first temple, it was really about glory to Solomon. It was really about glory to man. The whole time he was building the temple, he's married to a daughter of the Pharaoh. He's worshiping false gods. Solomon was the first king to really take Israel and start worshiping idols and false gods, right? Even while he's building the temple. And so the temple's just a building. I mean, me and you could build that thing, Eric, if we had a couple contractors. I mean, we could put up a building and build it, but it's the politics have to be right. And I think they are. I think it's going to all come together.
Well, that was a bold move, moving the embassy back to Jerusalem. The first president to do it in 50 years? Yeah, everybody else didn't have the cojones to do that.
Yeah.
And went ahead and did it, surprised everyone. And hats off, But Tom, I could talk to you forever about this heavy stuff. How about some lighter questions?
Okay.
And then we'll have to wrap it up. So, right. Who is your favorite author?
Well, I would say my favorite author is probably the Apostle Paul. Mm-hmm. Or John. John and Paul are probably my favorite. I mean, the Bible's really the book that I read. I'm not really a big reader. When I was reading Christian books, I loved a guy named Watchman Nee. He was a Christian writer back in the 30s and 40s. Really not even a writer, but he was a scholar. I think he wrote one book, but a lot of his teachings were recorded and translated into English. Watchman Nee was a really good writer that I admired. And there's just so many, guys out there.
Yeah.
Mike Bickle, the guy I mentioned from the International House of Prayer, he's another guy that I really enjoy.
Yeah. But, okay.
Yeah. So that's the answer to that.
Right on.
Light question.
Yeah. Okay. How about another one? What's the one thing you would do differently if you had to do it all over again?
Yeah, I think I haven't got to share that much of my life, but I was raised in a big family. We had 12 kids on the south side of Chicago, and I was number 8 of the 12. So I was one of the little guys, and I realized pretty quick that if I did good stuff, like nobody noticed, but if I did bad stuff, that got everybody's attention. You know what I mean? Like,
negative press.
Yeah. So my brother and I, who's a year older than me, my brother Frank, got into so much trouble. But I think I decided, we were raised in the Catholic Church, and I think when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I'm not kidding you, I can remember thinking, I want to be bad. I don't want to be good. I want to be bad. And I think if I could do it again, I would have not made that vow or pledge, because I spent a lot of years troubled and in trouble, and in trouble with authorities and the law and all those kind of things. And I think I really wasted my youth getting attention when I should have been applying myself to study or relationships or a lot of things. So that would be the one thing I would do different. My wife and I, when we were 27, I was 27, she was 28, gave our lives to the Lord. And it wasn't because we decided we want to be good. It was really the Lord had pushed us into a corner from all our mistakes and kind of had us where we couldn't go anywhere else. It was like him or die, kind of thing. And I was an alcoholic. I was suicidal. I was on drugs. I mean, I was into every vice you can imagine. It was Jesus or death. And he gave me a second chance. And so,
That sounds like a title for your next book.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I would do different. I would have never made that vow, and I would have applied myself at a much younger age. So
cool. That's a good one. Okay, so what's on the horizon for you? Any more projects, maybe with Paul Brody or something?
Yeah, I wrote a book a few years ago called The Praying Church, which really went over big, but I didn't really have a publisher or distribution set up, but we distributed several thousand of them, and it was translated into Spanish, and Talagua, Talagua,
Tagalog,
Tagalog. There you go.
Philippines.
From some scholars, Wycliffe scholars, and I don't know if you know Wycliffe. They translate the Bible. They basically
I've heard of them,
create, they create languages where there is no written language, and then they create a written language for that language, and then they translate the Bible into that language for the people. And so some friends I knew that did that in the Philippines, Moni and Marianne Cho, translated our book and then distributed it in the Philippines. And I don't know how far it went. I just wanted to get the book out. So I want to redo that book. I want to kind of like bring it up to date and redo that. And maybe I'll call it The Fire Falls.
Yeah. Cool.
Something with the fire in there,
Yeah.
so we can keep the theme going. So
right on. And you worked with Paul on this book, huh?
Yeah, Paul Brody. And I know he's a friend of yours. He recommended us. And I was telling you earlier, Paul did a great job. I mean, the cover of the book, you could see it on there if you guys can see. He did a great job on the cover. He, retitled the book. I had it named, I had done a first draft of it, was called Stop End Time Confusion Before Millions of Christians Take the Mark of the Beast. That was the first, that was my first effort. And so he changed the name and then that, and then did a beautiful job. We did as much editing. We probably did 15 rewrites, and then he had his editor do the final edit and formatted it for Amazon and did all that. And so without Paul, I mean, I thank God that he put Paul in my life, because he really worked us through that whole process and got the book to where it's being seen by, thousands of people that would have never seen it. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's really awesome to have that book in your hands when it's done, isn't it?
Yeah, and not only because I've done a book before, and I know what that's like, and I know what it's like to have boxes of books in your shed at the end, and
that's the beauty of ebooks.
Yeah. So this is good. Yeah. I think I'm going to do that book over again, and then but I've got more writing. I think there's a few more books in me, but we're just connecting out here in the DFW area to what we call the praying church movement, or the house of church movement, and house of prayer movement, and just want to see the church return to her first love, her one thing, and to be awakened to what's going, what he's up to in this hour. So
cool.
That's the main thing we're doing, and taking care of our grandkids. I mean, my wife spends, it's a part-time job for her just to buy birthday presents, Christmas presents for our 19 grandkids and keep up with all those
19 grandkids.
Yeah, I mean, that's when we all get together. I mean, man, and they get bigger every year, and so it's just like, wow. Yeah. That's a really exciting part of our life.
You got to start your own farm, your own cattle business.
Yeah, I should. I got some built-in workers there. Yeah.
So where do you want everybody to reach you online?
I have a website that's just being built. It's just called Tom Grossman SR for senior.com, and tomgrossmansenior.com, or they can go to Amazon, get the book, and
Reign of Fire.
Yeah, and the reason I use Tom Grossman Senior, is I have a son, Tom Grossman Jr., who's 41. So I mean, he's a grown man, and he has a ministry similar to mine, and has had for years. Cool. And that way we can keep ourselves straight on Facebook and things like that, because people say, hey, I got on Facebook and saw you look so young on there, and I'm like, yeah, that wasn't really me, So
Grossman is a popular name in Germany too. There's a lot of them here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, Tom, I could talk to you for a long time.
Yeah, Eric, I feel like we're buddies now. I want to
Yeah.
like call you once a week and see how you're doing or something.
We can do that. We can do a follow-up podcast, but I'm going to have to get to bed now. So thanks again for coming.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Don't hang up yet. I'm going to hit the button, but don't hang up, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thanks for being on the podcast, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, thanks, Eric. God bless you guys.